Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. We start with January 3rd, 1938, Dialogue 439. A disciple said, Rama asks, Brahman being pure, how can Maya arise from him and veil him also? Vasishta replies, in pure mind associated with strong dispassion, this question will not arise. Of course, in Advaita, non-dualistic philosophy, there can be no place for Jiva, Ishvara, and Maya. Oneself sinking into the self, the vasanas or tendencies will entirely disappear, leaving no room for such a question. Sri Bhagavan replies, the answers will be according to the capacity of the seeker. It is said in the second chapter of Gita that no one is born or dies. But in the fourth chapter, Sri Krishna says that numerous incarnations of his and of Arjuna have taken place, all known to him but not to Arjuna. Which of these statements is true? Both statements are true, but from different standpoints. Now a question is raised. How can Jiva rise up from the self? I must answer, only know your real being, then you will not raise this question. Why should a man consider himself separate? How was he before being born? Or how will he be after death? Why waste time in such discussions? What was your form in deep sleep? Why do you consider yourself as an individual? The disciple said, my form remains subtle in deep sleep. Sri Bhagavan replies, as is the effect, so is the cause. As is the tree, so is its seed. The whole tree is contained in the seed, which later manifests as the tree. The expanded tree must have a substratum, which we call Maya. As a matter of truth, there is neither seed nor tree. There is only being. The disciple said, Vasana Kshaya, total end of all predispositions. Manonasha, annihilation of the mind. And Atma Sakshatkara, realization of the self. They seem to be interdependent. Sri Bhagavan replies, the different expressions have only one meaning. They differ according to the individual stage of progress. Dispassion, realization, all mean the same thing. Also, they say practice in dispassion. Why practice? Because the modes of mind once subside and then rise up, again subside and rise up, and so on. The dialogue continues, but let's take up that much to start. The initial question was in reference to Yoga Vasishta, in which Rama asked Vasishta, Brahman being pure, how can Maya or illusion arise from him and veil him also? Illusion seems to arise from Brahman and also obscures the understanding of Brahman. How can this be? If Brahman is pure being, how can this be? Vasishta replied, in a pure mind associated with strong dispassion, this question will not arise. What is a pure mind? It is one that has ceased to believe in its own imaginings, the imaginings that constitute ignorance. A pure mind associated with strong dispassion. Dispassion means to be unmoved, to not deviate if thought deviates. It also implies a comprehension of the real nature and source of happiness. The disciple continued his question, saying, of course, in Advaita, there can be no place for Jiva, the individual, Ishvara, the Lord, and Maya, illusion. Oneself sinking into the self, the vasanas will entirely disappear, leaving no room for such a question. At this point, the disciple has very well answered his own question. If you sink into the self, which implies the dissolution of misidentifications of all kinds, the vasanas or tendencies constituting delusion will vanish because they are unreal. When ignorance vanishes, how can these questions arise? How can there be the idea of Maya or a veil and so forth and so on? Sri Bhagavan replies graciously and compassionately and explains thus. The answers will be according to the capacity of the seeker. Spiritual instruction is given in light of the understanding of the capacity of the seeker and their inclination. The teaching by itself is actually utterly transcendent of all words and thoughts. That teaching is ever the same. And in it there find no space for inclination, capacity, or lack thereof. To make it clear, Sri Bhagavan continues by giving an example. And he said, it is said in the second chapter of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, that no one is born or dies. But in the fourth chapter, Sri Krishna says that numerous incarnations of his and of Arjuna have taken place, all known to him but not to Arjuna. Which of these statements is true? He answers the question himself. Both statements are true, but from different standpoints. In the second chapter, the standpoint is that of ultimate reality, the truth as it is. In the fourth chapter, the teaching is given by Sri Krishna that is fitted for Arjuna at that point in time. Both statements are true, but from different standpoints. Now a question is raised. How can jiva, that is the individual, rise up from the self? How can the jiva rise up from the self? Does the self give birth to individuals? If individuality is false, can the false arise from the true? Can the unreal come out of the real? How can jiva rise up from the self? I must answer, only know your real being, then you will not raise this question. If you know your real being, you will find that that alone exists always, everywhere, and that nothing, the jiva or anything else, ever rises up. Absolute being is indivisible and timelessly the same. Only know your real being, then you will not raise this question. The question arises from the context of individuality. Will that context be able to explain that in which there is no individuality? Only know your real being, then you will not raise this question. Neither you nor anything else arises at any time. One self alone exists eternally. Why should a man consider himself separate? How was he before being born? Or how will he be after death? Can you be separate from the self, the absolute? When you consider yourself separate, what idea do you actually have in mind? Does the separation actually exist? Can you be separate from your own existence? If only you know your real being, you know the existence by the existence, and existence is invariable, not individualized, not separated, not imagining separation, not conceiving of duality. How were you before you were born? How will you be after death? Can there be birth and death before and after for existence? And if what you conceive is something other or in addition to, existence. How could that be you? From the point of view of the truth of your being, all of these questions have a very simple answer. It is being, only being, just as it is. From any other standpoint, the questions are perplexing. Or how can you know what you were before being born, or how you will be after death? So Sri Bhagavan then says, why waste time in such discussion? What was your form in deep sleep? Why do you consider yourself as an individual? In the waking and dreaming states, you seem as if endowed with a form. It is the body, gross or subtle, that forms the identity of the individual. In deep sleep, though, what form do you have? What body do you have? What identification do you have? The form is not, but existence is still there. What always remains, the existence, alone is real, and alone can actually be the self. What is transient and state dependent cannot be real, cannot be the self. For what you truly are, you are always, existence being unalterable at all times. Why do you consider yourself as an individual? Who considers himself as an individual? Why do you consider yourself as an individual? Put the question to yourself. There is no valid reason to consider yourself as an individual. Illusion, delusion, does not have a valid cause. The disciple then said, "My form remains subtle in deep sleep." Sri Bhagavan responds, "As is the effect, so is the cause. As is the tree, so its seed." Usually we would expect him to say, "As is the cause, so the effect." Here he has said, "As is the effect, so is the cause." The result of answering either brings one to the same conclusion. The whole tree is contained in the seed, which later manifests as the tree. The expanded tree must have a substratum which we call Maya. As a matter of truth, there is neither seed nor tree. There is only being. Questions about causality, cause and effect, are present only until the objectifying outlook is abandoned. When not a single objective thing exists, how can we consider cause and effect? Cause of what? The effect of what? The expanded tree, that is all manifestation, must have a substrate, which we call illusion. Both the seed and the tree, the cause and the effect, the basis and the manifestation are illusory. They are not the reality. As a matter of truth, there is neither seed nor tree, neither cause nor effect, neither individual nor the world, either illusion nor its manifestation. There is only being. If one comprehends this, There is only being. All questions are answered. All doubts are resolved. All ignorance dissolves. And illusion vanishes. Sufferings are at an end, and bondage is no more. The disciple then asks, Vasana Kashaya, total end of all predispositions. Manonasha, annihilation of the mind. And Atma Sakshatkara, realization of the self. They seem to be interdependent. Each one seems to depend on the others. Why is this so? Sri Bhagavan answers, the different expressions have only one meaning. They differ according to the individual stage of progress. Dispassion, realization, all mean the same thing. Also, they say, practice and dispassion. Why practice? Because the modes of mind, one subside and then rise up, again subside and rise up, and so on. What is the real meaning of the total end of all tendencies? What is the real significance of destruction of the mind? What is meant by realization of the self? All of these are characterized by egolessness. Dispassion, realization, all mean the same thing. If you're truly endowed with dispassion or detachment, you have clarity regarding happiness and reality and your identity. Similarly, if you have realization, there is no confusion regarding happiness, reality, or your identity. The advice given is one should engage in practice and dispassion. Why practice? Why practice and what should be practiced? Practice is because the mind that once subsides rises up again. That is the experience of seekers after self-realization. Again, this subsides and rises up, and so on. Practice is meant to put an end to repetitive illusion or repeating ignorance. In the realization of the self, there is the certitude of knowledge that that alone exists. If this is the case, why practice? Because of the modes of mind recurring, because of illusion returning. So again, we see here the same approach as was mentioned in chapters 2 and 4 of the Gita earlier in the dialogue. Instruction is given for the capacity of the seeker, yet reality remains immovable and never the same. The disciple then spoke again, saying, "Beginningless predisposition makes one do wrong. Without jnana, knowledge, this predisposition cannot vanish, but jnana looks almost impossible. Expiation alone cannot undo all the karma, for how much expiation will be needed? Look where we will, everything looks difficult, even impossible. Association with the wise seems to be the only cure of all this, of all ills." Sri Bhagavan compassionately and graciously responds, "What is to be done? Reality is one only. How can it be realized? Realization is thus an illusion. Practice seems to be necessary. Who is to practice? Looking for the doer, the act and the accessories disappear. Moreover, if realization is not present here and now, how can it, newly got, be of any use? What is permanent must be eternally present. How can it be newly got and be permanent also? Realize what is present here and now. The sages did so before and still do that only. Hence they say that it looks as if newly got. Once veiled by ignorance and later revealed, reality looks as if newly realized, but it is not new. The disciple then said, Karma, Bhakti, Yoga, and Jnana, and their subdivisions only confuse the mind. To follow the elders' words seems to be the only right thing to do. What should I hold? Please tell me. I cannot sift the Shrutis and Smritis. They are too vast, so please advise me. To that, Bhagavan remained silent. Thinking that ignorance is strong in itself, everything seemed impossible to the seeker. He grasped on to one thing that he knew to be true, which is associating with the wise, that is the cure of all ills. Listen to Bhagavan's answer. It is very profound. What is to be done? This can be understood in two ways. That is, if it seems impossible, what can be done? Or, otherwise interpreted, is there anything to be done in order for there to be realization? Then continuing, he says, reality is one only. How can it be realized? That is, how can it be made more real than it already is? The reality is just as it is and ever is. Realization, that is, making or attaining a new reality, is thus an illusion. Practice seems to be necessary. Then, who is to practice? That both resolves the need for practice as well as shows the way to practice. Who is to practice? Looking for the doer, the act and the accessories disappear. If realization is not present here and now, how can it, newly got, be of any use? It won't be eternal. This is what is meant. What is permanent must be eternally present. Can it be newly got and be permanent also? the contradiction should be evident. Therefore, reality is not something to be attained anew, but it should be self-revealed in its own light. It must be permanent or eternal to be real. Realize what is present here and now. That is, what is ever existent. The sages did so before and still do that only. That which was present then and there in the most ancient of times is being ever existent, the same even now. And you realize the same as they did. It looks as if newly got, once veiled by ignorance and later revealed. Reality looks as if newly realized, but it is not new. It ever is. Inquire and realize that you are that. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.